lovely gentleman in red is the incredible Beau Shao. And you guys know this guy over here, this stagehand here. Beau is co-founder and chairman of Evolve, a philanthropic investment firm supporting organizations that relieve inner suffering and facilitate inner transformation. Wow. Prior to Evolve, listen to this, Beau was founding partner at Matrix China, a leading tech venture cap firm, which has funded over 500 companies and manages over $8 billion. Beau and Soren, take it away. And they'll be talking about a new chapter, consciousness, investing, and society.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, welcome, Beau.
Thank you.
So Beau was with us, for those of you who were with us at Wisdom 2.0 4 years ago. Beau, you came and gave a talk. And in that talk, you talked about a couple of things. One, you talked about, I think you were just launching the venture firm, so I'd love to kind of get updated on that. But you also talked about your own childhood and your own experience in China, both being raised in poverty, but also with experiences I think you had with your father of real kind of hurt. And I'm wondering if we could kind of, if you don't mind, if we could start with that, because it feels like that experience you had as a young kid really kind of framed your life. And that the need to understand your trauma, to heal your trauma, to really look at that aspect of your life kind of has allowed you to put your attention into things that are more meaningful. And so I'm wondering if you could just share kind of where you are at in that journey of understanding your own kind of like personal trauma and how that might kind of show up in your life as part of what your gift can be in the world.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Let's see. First of all, I did grow up in poverty, but everybody was poor in China back then. So it didn't feel like that was poor. That wasn't actually wasn't a major issue, because interestingly, comparisons is what causes a lot of the problems. I did have certain trauma, but that trauma cannot compare to the trauma that the gentleman just walked off the stage had, right? But however, what I realized over time is that regardless of the economic environment or the social, cultural environment we grew up, we are all deeply affected by how we were brought up. It really deeply shaped who we are, for good and bad. My parents did a lot of good things for me, a lot of good things. But there are certain things I needed that they couldn't give me. They did the best they could. Right? One of my favorite sayings from a process called the Hoffman process is that all parents are responsible, but they're not to blame. And they did the best. My father and my mother did the best, and they did an incredible job. But there's certain things around me needing somebody to be present with me, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually present with me, that I did not have.
And they probably were not modeled that.
No, they were not. They couldn't get, my mother couldn't get in touch with that sense because it would have been too painful to be present in her life, given what she went through. Yeah. But the result was that for the longest time of my life, in fact, even today, to a certain extent, when I'm with somebody sitting down, right? If I'm performing a role, that's perfectly fine. If I'm a board member, if an investor, I'm speaking, that's all good. But there are no role to play. There's no information exchange. I'm not adding any value to a conversation. Then I have these questions in the back of my mind that's very subtle. It's like, does this person really want to be with me? Why is he here or is she here? Like, isn't she bored? Or like, what does this person want to spend time with me? It's like a very deep down, subtle question. In fact, when I saw my kids, playing with other kids a few years ago, prior they started having these kind of questions too, probably. But like, it's like, why are they just hanging out? Like, why did this friend choose my daughter to hang out? And like, why? What's the particular thing about her? And I think deep down, I didn't feel there was something really valuable to me as a person. Right? All these achievements and money notwithstanding. And then my father sort of, in some ways, the way he treated me provided a way out, which is I need to perform. I just perform and achieve, and that gave me a sense of self. Right? But of course, that's very fragile. And it needs to be defended all the time and all that. So So my journey has been very much through a combination of internal family system, which is a particular type of therapy, psychotherapy, to meditation, which is a Buddhism kind of meditation, to something called diamond approach, a variety of different ways for me to sort of find who I really am. And the answer is very surprising. Is who I am is not really here, or it's here, but not it's like it's this kind of a weird, non-scientific answer that the physicists in me would have rejected a long time ago. Right? And always like people talk about energy and vibration. I was like, what energy? Energy is what form of energy? Is it chemical? Is it is it kinetic or is it potential? Vibration. What hertz is it? It's like so it didn't make any sense. But now like I starting to use that language to my horror, but it's true that that you do feel that thing. It's very subtle, but it's there. So where it leads me to now is a sense of self that often may be bigger than I am, where there's less fear and I see more the patterns of my behavior, which are still there, but lighter. I can catch them earlier, whether I'm working with friends or working or with my kids. I see all of that. I mean, and what's interesting, life keeps throwing challenges at me that's just at the right level for me. It's just the next level up. And it's really hard, actually, when I see, it's actually not easy. It feels like I'm still being challenged if I pay attention to it. If I don't pay attention, then I won't see it. But if I really pay attention, I see that I'm continuously being challenged.
Yeah, Jack Kornfield says, who was here yesterday, says, you know the purpose of every initiation, to prepare you for the next initiation.
Yeah.
So you have this journey, and you also have this desire to be of service. And how do you decide what things to focus on, whether it's philanthropic or investing? How do you decide what are the things where my capital, my insights, my experience can be of most benefit?
Well, I would say that the desire to be of service came naturally. I think in some ways, if one can occasionally look beyond oneself, have a bigger sense of self, what else are we going to do with our lives? Just make more money? That doesn't make any sense, right? It's like, I don't need more money. So the logical way, once we're able to look beyond ourselves, service becomes natural. It's not something because it's the right thing to do or people will like me, though. To be honest, definitely I appreciate people liking me I have to be honest, but it's not the main motivation. But in terms of venture and foundation, so we definitely do both. And the overall focus is around inner well-being. And it resonates deeply with me because I've gone through that journey myself. And I see my friends and colleagues and people that I meet. What I see is there's so much suffering in everybody, no matter rich or poor or whatnot. There's so much suffering. In one day I could be talking with a billionaire, and in the afternoon I'll be talking with a former incarcerated lifer, right? That it's so similar. Just the nature of the trauma, of course, can be very different, but the desire for freedom and the suffering came from not be able to see what is really true beyond the patterns is just, it just feels so familiar and heartbreaking. So what we do is we give grants to organizations. So it could be, in Africa, we'll be mostly working on basic mental health issues. In more developed countries, could be more in the inner growth and spiritual growth areas. So we could support teachers. We could support an app like Insight Timer. But actually, so Insight Timer is a for-profit investment. But one of the things we do on the for-profit side is we make it very clear that making money is not the number one thing. In fact, we actually freely see that there is a conflict. People sometimes like to talk about, there's really no conflict between making money and doing good. I think, yes, in some cases it's true. I think in most cases it's actually not. to particularly for the, if you look at 100 lifespan, yes, sure, if you do the wrong thing, eventually you get paid back. Your company eventually dies after 20 years or 30 years, or maybe on next life you'll suffer. But really, there is a conflict. And I think we want to be very clear that when there is a conflict in a medium and short term, we will choose impact over profit. And we want to encourage our entrepreneurs to do that. We want to be the voice on the board that would push for that. And often entrepreneurs sometimes get lost, sometimes they don't. But even when they don't get lost in the profit, and not just profits, like the pressure to raise another round, the KPIs that need to grow every month. I mean, there's so much pressure, particularly when the company get bigger, that we want to be the voice that supports them and holds back some of the pure commercial interests, which invariably, as company get bigger, will get on the board and become investors.
Great. Beautiful. Thank you. And in terms of that, when you gave the example of both the billionaire and the person who's having a hard time, do you feel like there's just that suffering that's inevitable in life, and it changes, life changes, and if we think we got it, then all of a sudden we don't got it, and there's always something in our lives that kind of creates suffering? Or do you feel like there's actually, if we work on ourselves and we raise awareness, there's at least a way to minimize that? I know we're both parents. We talk about when it's so hard to see our children suffer. And that's kind of an inevitable suffering of life.
Yeah. Well, I used to have a very glib answer, which is pain is not avoidable, suffering is optional. I think many of you have heard of that, right? And it's true. But what I found is that it's really hard to avoid suffering. And there are so many people around me, whether they are adults or children, but my own children, for example, they suffer a lot. And it's very hard to help people. And that's because people have to go through a process of growth. And in that process, there is going to be a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And if I take away that suffering, or if I want to just do my thing, which is this performance achievement, I can help you, it's really, it doesn't work that way. And like a friend of mine recently had a huge breakthrough, but he suffered for 15 years, right? And career-wise, relational-wise, it was so much suffering. And I could offer something, and I did offer some things, but he wasn't ready to take it up. Right? And there's a particular time that came a few weeks ago, and I was there, and the breakthrough happened. And now he's a different person. It's like he's talking about all this energy vibration shit that he's like overnight. He was a physics major too. It's like unbelievable. But it happened overnight. But he was ready. It was so much that he was willing to say, I'm letting go what I thought was working for me, really it wasn't. But it takes so long to see it. Yeah. Right? And everybody has their own path, and it's very hard for me to speed it up. And that's particularly in the case of our children, it's just so hard. Yeah. But however, we can still do a lot, because by presenting the right tools at the right time, making it easy, making the right tool available for different people, because I do think that it's not one size fits all. There's so many tools that, spiritual, psychological, body work, there's so many tools out there. So be able to present that to the person at the right time, that's a huge amount of value there, because without that, they would be searching in the blind. If you think about how do we find the right tool right now? We can't, right? It's like, we only see a very tiny possibility. Some friend referred me to something or told me something. But in reality, there's so many good, tools or modalities to work on ourselves.
There's I don't know if you heard the phrase that enlightenment is an accident, and our job is to become accident prone.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Do enough things, and eventually something maybe happens. Yes. And I'm curious, and we'll have a little time for questions. If you have a question for Beau, there's a mic that's over here. What is it that pulls your heart now? What is it that you wake up in the morning and it's like, this is the thing that I feel like if I can make some shift or impact, and this like an acupuncture point feels like the shift that's most useful for me and the best I can see of the planet, knowing that we all have a very limited view of what's actually possible. But where is your heart and attention driven?
Well, personally, what pulls me hard right now every day is my children. And one of my kids was suffering, and that really gets me. Really, despite what I say right now in my practice, for a few days, I was really low in the past few weeks. I was just, like, I didn't want to get out of bed. And children and parenting has always been very close to me, because the way I grew was dealing with another one of my child, and he was my teacher that motivated me to change. But now is the turn for another child to challenge. And they're good. It's not theirs. It's my. I need to work through whatever. Even if they are suffering, I can do certain things, but it's really my inner process that needs to grow. So the thing that probably is the closest to my heart of all the things we do is parenting. Because, as I often say, that it's the most important job we have, both individually as a parent, but really as a society, to bring up the next generation with their soul relatively intact.
Right.
And
just the right amount of suffering.
It was just right, and suffering is not avoidable, but our society is so horrible at it. In our schools, our social media, the whole culture is just terrible. We focus so much on intellectual development, right? And we pay so little attention to what's really going on inside. And even social emotional learning. I would say, fuck learning. Let's social emotional. Let's make sure that they are really good first.
Right.
Right. So one of the companies I feel really passionate is a company called Parent Lab, right? And so we spent past 4 years doing research around parenting. We talked to several hundred experts, read 3,000 papers, retained about 100 experts in different fields of child development and coaching. And now we are trying to make that available in the form of an app and also a coaching service, so that it really becomes customized, because there's such a difference between different children and before different stages of their development, that one size fits all simply doesn't work, right? So really offering things that's fit for particular family dynamics, particularly children's personality and the way their body works. It's just there's so much science out there, actually, and there's so much knowledge and experience, and most of that is really not accessible to anybody, right? We might read one good book, but then after a few weeks, we promptly forget everything we read. But most books are terrible. But to be able to curate that and then integrate it, not just piecemeal information from different experts. So that's been really close to my heart, beautiful. And we're working on it a lot.
And I think the orientation that, at least for me, they're teachers to help us see what might not be seen inside us.
Yeah.
And a book can tell us what to say and do all these different things, but that there's a karmic dance.
Yeah, well, there are 3 parts to parenting. I think there's one is starting with inside us. What's happening here? What's triggering us? How has it to do with our own childhood? What's our state of being right now? Right. In fact, that's so important. It's a long conversation. And the second is what's happening inside the child. Right. What's their stage of development? What's their neurobiological state? What's their psychological state of being, et cetera, et cetera? What's their social challenges and all these sort of things happening in school? What's happening with them? And third is what's happened in the relational field between the two of us.
The energy field.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Don't remind me. So, but it's really true. Like there's this field, and then when the field is not right, no matter what you say, they will reject you.
Yeah.
But when the field is right, they will do things. So it's like, so paying attention to all 3 of them is really, we call it 3D parenting, but it's paying attention to all 3. But of course, there's a lot of knowledge and science and research about each of the 3, right? So I think that's, I always often say, if that's the only thing I do in life, none of the venture capital stuff, none of the startup things, whatever. This is the only thing I do before I die, and we can impact a generation of kids. That'd be
your
and we can stop the generation.
I see there's a few people with questions, so maybe just say your name, where you're from, and a question.
Hey, Beau. Good to see you. Ben Painter from Boston, Massachusetts.
Ben.
Hey.
Hi.
And Beau, I'm the
Nice to meet you.
student of Doug Worthen and Jessica Mori, so thank you for your...
Oh, great.
Yes. And my question for you is I'd love to hear about your vision for the psychedelic renaissance that's happening in this country right now.
Yeah, it's a long answer. There's not a simple answer here. I'm a huge fan of psychedelics, both in the therapeutic setting of healing, but also in spiritual growth as well. Both are incredibly, and it's really unique. I mean, if you think about the possibility of changing a generation's people's consciousness in one generation, reaching billion people, this is really about the only thing that can happen because it's quick, it's it's deep, and scalable. Right? There's really no other thing has those three characteristics. However, it's not a panacea. So often people rely on it too much. You know, people who are sort of the whatever psychonauts, whatever, they're relying on it too much. Like, yes, it's one thing to have those experiences, but then have an ongoing practice and ongoing healing, therapy, whatnot, a practice, and integrating that into one's life is incredibly important. And one could have an incredible open experience, and some people, maybe 5% people, will change their lives as a result of it. The other 95%, they will promptly go back to the life as they was, particularly after a few months. And it was still there in the back of their mind, but they would have forgotten about the experience consciously. So that's one thing. So this just not the two. People talk about integration, like integration for the next 24, 48 hours. But for me, it's really integration of the rest of your life. And most people don't do that. There's not infrastructure to enable people to do that today, right? And the secondly is there's going to be a lot of bad trips, right? 5 to 10% are going to be difficult trips, right? And there's, again, no infrastructure to support people who go through those experiences. So I'm very, it's more part of the most powerful tool in our quiver. But on the other hand, I think it's a tool that needs to be, there's also a possibility of commercialization totally taking away the spiritual aspect of it. Think about what happened to even like opium, right? You have fentanyl today that evolved from opium over over several hundred years to fentanyl, right? And I shudder to think if this falls in the hand of a pure commercial interests, where will we end up 50 or 100 years from now? Right, so it's great, but one has to be very cautious around it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Hi, my name is Nova. I live here in Los Altos. My company is Happy Brain. We help people measure happiness based on neuroscience. It's like a combination of these chemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, and cortisol. The question is, Beau, what is the meaning of life? And the second one is, what happiness means to you?
The second one's a little easier, but both are hard, actually. Let's see.
Joseph Campbell said, I don't think what we're seeking is the meaning of life. I think what we're seeking is the experience of being alive.
Yeah, I think that's as good as answer as any.
If you need one.
I mean, I think in certain moments, we're all capable of experiencing certain moments in our lives when we don't need to ask that question anymore. And I think it's to observe those moments and to do things to enable more of those moments to occur. So what I mean by that example would be, like, if I'm really just simply sweeping the floor or washing dishes, and just 100% present with that task, I wouldn't be asking what's the meaning of life in that moment. It wouldn't even occur to me to ask. It's actually meaning itself, right? Even in the depths of suffering, if one's willing to go toward that suffering, go into that pain, and experience it with no rejection, And that's really hard to do, by the way. It's really, really hard to do. We have all sorts of fears and that will come up. But if one is willing to go to that, so I don't do that all the time, just to be clear. But particularly the recent challenge is so big. But in the smaller challenges, there's a lot of pain, there's some pain. Go to that and actually really experience where that is in your body and in my body and really experience it. In those moments, for me, that's also meaning of life. It doesn't need to answer that. So it is the meaning of life for me. So.
And that would answer the second question too, maybe?
Yeah, that's how we answer the second question is, I think seeking happiness could be very tricky. Because there are going to be lots of moments where we are not quote unquote happy if we measure ourselves in this, in the brain. But if we are willing to go toward that place and be with it, then that's, for me at least, that's actually, there's been some breakthrough in the past few months where I detect certain very subtle rejections of my experience. Very subtle, very, very subtle. And if I catch it and then actually go toward whatever it was I was trying to reject that experience, certain things open up. And it's very freeing. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we might have time for one. We'll get what we can get, but go ahead. The tweet-sized version would be perfect if you have a tweet-sized version of a question.
Okay. Thank you. I'm older, so that tweet-sized version.
Well, do it as you need.
I wanted to thank you for the way that you speak about the transformation as a parent, and it has personally inspired me in the work that I do. I've worked with families in navigating that pregnancy, birth, and early parenting, and it's a time when I think that people can find connection with the greater humanity. And I find also over the last 25 years that that's happened less. So I'm working on bringing that intention into the project that I'm doing right now. But I'm also experiencing a tremendous transformation as a leader as I move into fundraising. And I think that for me, I can see a lot of growth work that's happened through me being an entrepreneur for 25 years, but in a really small scale. And as I grow into a founder of a startup, it brings to mind the nature of these relationships. And I've just been really thoughtful about that. So you talked about sort of having a bit of a shield of competence, and that's my language, so I apologize if I'm not getting it quite right, that you can be, okay, this is my groove, this is where I feel secure, this is where I feel safe, because you're an expert and well-respected.
Ask your question, because I have no time to answer that.
No, I know. But what is do you feel like you have a growth path around the nature of investment relationships? You've moved into a different investment space. Does it change the way on an interpersonal level you're working with founders and what?
Oh yeah, definitely changes a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's hard to. So recently one of our companies went bankrupt, right? And we lost some money. But actually the founder is joining us as residents, entrepreneur in residence. So we clearly still like him a lot. I'm not speaking to him forever because he lost money. And it was, let's see.
Well, do you feel like the most famous people I know are also the most insecure often because they feel like everybody who approaches them wants something from them?
Right. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying is that there's a heart to this that I find very nourishing.
Great. So, and I
Right?
think how do you dance with that? Where if you're either a foundation or you're an investor, there's this thing that people. But the only way for you to find investees is if people come to you. But how does that relation stay authentic, or do you feel like it
Yes.
inevitably shifts once there's money involved?
Thank you, Soren.
Yeah.
That's my job.
Because I'm trying to
let's see.
talk to people and they assume I just want to pitch, but I want to actually get to know
It is hard.
as human beings.
It is
how can we
hard.
create something.
Yesterday was a person on the foundation side who's, who gives me a hug, and I question her: is he giving me a hug because I might donate? Right? It is hard. I don't have a good answer. I I think in some ways that's what life's practice is, right? If we live in a monastery, there's no, even the monastery to be there, so who's going to get to take out the trash? Probably the point of contention. But I think just being able to manage through that, I don't have a magic answer. I think we do really try to establish a personal trust first. For us, the founder and his or her personal work is incredibly important. We don't invest in people who don't have a personal practice, whatever they may be. It might be. And we find that it's very easy to lose one's ways, particularly when the company scales, even though they might be really good intention and compassionate person. So a ongoing personal practice is really needed. And yeah, and then I often will say, from an impact perspective, that's how we think about this. And then, then I'm wearing the investor hat, that's how I think about this. And then let's see whether we can have these two things meet somewhere together. But we're pretty clear about where I stand on particular issues from those perspectives. I don't know if that helps. But.
I hope if it's okay, as a portfolio company founder of Evolve Ventures, Beau was the person after I exited 4 companies, 2 failed, 2 successful, and meeting Beau was the most terrifying thing on this planet because I've seen him on stage, I've seen all the videos, and he was like the dream come true investor, at least on TV. And when I actually met him, he was the first person who helped me as a founder to be seen as a being before a human doing, but really being a human being. And I'm still on that journey, but they're one of the most incredible, like right now I could cry just thinking of how Beau showed up on our first meeting and Oleg, his partner. As before investors, they were just humans who helped me feel so seen. And so if that's helpful to answer your question, it's really manifesting what his own inner practice just shows up, and to inspire me as a founder to do all my own work so that I can commit to show up as that founder.
I'm going to jump in. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, Beau, I think it goes back just to end because we're out of time. But just to that, when we started, you had talked about that spiritual scene and emotional scene that many of us did not get from our parents and that we're longing for. They might put food on the table. They might give us results. And it feels like that's a little bit of what your life is about, is knowing the importance of that from a young age and wanting to.
I think in some ways it's the combination. I went very extreme on the rational side of the worldly rational side, and now this side is coming up. And I think part of my role is to combine these two together, because I think actually the world needs both. Right? We all become hippies and not do anything and just smoke pot all day. It wouldn't work. Right. So we need both. And I think we are sort of indeed people in this room, all of us are indeed trying to figure out how do you do both. Right.
Beautiful. Thank you, Beau.
Thank you.